Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia. We love Parramatta. It's obvious. We've got many different videos about Parramatta. And today we've got one about the original hospital. Back in 1788, when the first fleet arrived, they would have had some kind of makeshift hospital in Port Jackson. They would have had Surgeon John White, who came on board the first fleet, and many other surgeons alongside him to assist anyone who was sick or injured, possibly from flogging, and they would have had to have set up a hospital pretty soon. It wasn't long after the first fleet arrived that they settled in Parramatta, or Rose Hill as it was first known. They needed a hospital. And from 1789, they had a hospital called the Tent Hospital. The Tent Hospital was actually the third hospital in the colony, the first two being set up in Port Jackson or Sydney. It was called the Tent Hospital because it looked like a tent. It was made from two thatched sheds put together to handle the injured and sick convicts who worked and lived in the Parramatta Rose Hill area. The convict population grew, but so did the illness. Wounds from floggings and exhausting hard labour meant that they need somewhere for the poor convicts to go when they were indisposed. Thomas Arndell, who we'd touched on briefly, was the first surgeon who was set up in the Tent Hospital. The Tent Hospital ran until 1792, when they realised with the amount of people they now had in Parramatta, they needed something that was more permanent and a larger facility. By 1791, the Parramatta population exceeded that of Sydney, if you could imagine. From 1792 to 1818, the General Hospital looked after convicts who lived and worked in the Parramatta area. The General Hospital, which was the second hospital of Parramatta, was made from clay brick. It was 100 metres from the Tent Hospital. It had 2 wards. There were at least 9 other buildings surrounding it, which were the homes of the surgeons and guards. All the buildings, including the hospital, were plastered and whitewashed for insulation most likely. The 2 wards were placed apart, one for men and one for women. David Collins in 1798 said that it was decaying already, and Governor Macquarie in 1809 had suggested a new hospital needed to be built and that the old one had to be dismantled. Samuel Marsden even noted in 1818 that it was open for every infamous character to enter as it had no locking system. They were thieving from the hospital and there was no morgue. Marsden commented that the dead would be in the room with the living patients. And by this time, Surgeon Major West commented that the roof leaked, there were broken windows, wood and food was rotting, and the dead bodies in the passageway between the wards was disgusting. The head doctor, Edward Luttrell, was very negligent. They needed a new hospital, and Governor Macquarie saw to it. He had grand plans of the new hospital being the Colonial Hospital, being a wonderful place for patients. The Colonial Hospital was set up from 1818 and was open till 1848. A 2-storey brick building with an upper and lower veranda that should have been able to accommodate 100 patients comfortably inside, and grounds for a garden area around the exterior for patients to walk around. He also wanted high wooden walls to enclose the yard. Richard Rouse was the overseer at this hospital. When completed, it contained 2 wards and outbuildings, 2 morgues, washrooms, toilets and a kitchen. John Watts was the architect that Governor Macquarie selected. He'd also designed the St John's Anglican Cathedral in Parramatta. Now, John Watts built the Colonial Hospital on the same design as he'd only just previously built the Military Hospital in Sydney. This, however, resulted in not only the convicts not separated from male and female, but the hospital could only hold 50 patients, which is only half of what Governor Macquarie had requested. Parramatta saw many diseases from influenza in the 1820s, dropsy, dysentery, and many others. It caused the colonial hospital to become overfilled. Many were turned away and died, and some convicts that were injured on the job could not be transported to the hospital and died. In the 1840s, many of the convicts had finished their time, and due to little work that was around, as most of it was safe for convicts, they weren't able to make money and be able to live by themselves. When they lost their convict status or got their ticket of leave, they lost the benefits that came with being a convict, access to the hospital. Although the governor at the time allowed them to still be seen at the hospital, many of them were so sick because they couldn't afford to eat healthily, as well as their huts were not watertight and had earth floors, which meant they would just get sick. The hospital had so many sick patients. At one point, these ex-convict, now paupers, were being seen at the hospital for 1 shilling a day. The free settlers had to pay their way, and so the paupers had to also, at least until a hospital could be created for them. They didn't have to wait long, because shortly afterwards, convicts being transported to Australia came to an end. This meant that there was no more convicts. Therefore, after the last lot had finished their time as convicts, we had no more convicts in Australia. A convict-only hospital was not needed. It was handed over from the government to the Benevolent Society, and a new hospital was created in 1848 called the Parramatta District Hospital, or the Macquarie Hospital, named after Lachlan Macquarie, no doubt. This hospital saw out almost the end of the century before they decided they needed an upgrade again. This saw the creation of the Cottage Hospital in 1897. It was a red brick hospital and it ran until 1943. It was located to the west of the old hospital, facing the river, and it was composed of 3 blocks, built in the Federation Queen Anne style. The central block was 2-storey and had 2 large chimneys. The Cottage Hospital saw many new things, including a children's ward and an operating theatre. It was also a more attractive hospital, more welcoming. It was a lot larger as well and had a lot more room. This would be the last hospital on this particular site. A new hospital in 1938 named the Jeffrey House was being built to take over. It was slow to get going because of World War II, but by 1942 it was up and running, which would go on until 1977 when Westmead Hospital was in construction, and now Westmead is one of the biggest hospitals in Sydney. But let's go back to the foundations on the corner of George Street and Macquarie. This is the history that we want to look into today, and they've got it on display, the foundations on display in this area. It's definitely worth a look, so we went down and had a look for ourselves.
So this is the area at Parramatta. It's across the road from the police station and the courthouse, which has been there many years. And this particular area is the federal government building it's known as Justice Precinct. I won't film it because for obvious reasons. But this particular area, it's a little glary, so I'll take some still shots, but this is where the original hospital, which one of approximately 5 were built from 1790 right up until 1950, which that particular hospital, which is, I believe, a private hospital now, might be mistaken, is still there, and it backs onto the Parramatta River. These artifacts that I'm showing here, and there'll be photos taken to give you a better view. These particular artifacts were all unearthed in this location, and that the location is, as I said, very significant to the Parramatta district, the Parramatta area, for the importance of being a hospital, but also for being for being basically in the something that's can be identified that was here in the 18th century, which there's not many places in the country, as I'm sure people would know, that can still be even unearthed as in this, this is the old sewer system from the 1790s, 2 years after they got here. So it's a very significant area, and that's, as I wander over this way, that particular area over here, this glass, it's like a glass, it's like a hall, I guess, or it's some sort of a seminar room that the government building uses, and this is where, as you'll see in the still images we've taken, this area all here is where the first hospital was built, and that's starting from 1790 through till 1792. It was upgraded, and then it was upgraded again 1818, 1902, and then finally they built the hospital, which still exists now, which you can see beyond here, beyond the next, in this room here, some artifacts in there, that still exists today and is used as a hospital, but in a different way. I don't believe it's a government hospital. I believe it's now something of a private hospital. Let me see. Okay, I may be wrong. I thought that it might very well be something that elective surgery is done in there. But that hospital leads down onto the Parramatta River, and like I said, that is the last hospital they built here, next to the first hospital, but certainly not the main hospital for this area is in Westmead, 5 or 6 kilometres that way. That is the main hospital, or one of the largest in the state, and state of the art. Set up children's hospitals separately, and everything else. That's where we have been, and it's quite the tribute. The Parramatta, the council and the local government have succeeded in preserving this, and they've done a good job. You can't argue with that. Regional Parramatta Hospital. Like, share, subscribe, or don't.
It really is a fascinating place to come down and have a look. It's like being on an archaeological site. It's really interesting, and my daughter enjoyed it too. It's a little confusing to see which hospital was which, but it is so interesting. Bits of wood and brick from over 100 years. It's like you're part of it. And they've also got another room that's separate from this particular site that has all the artifacts that have been dug up from the little area. It was hard to kind of get up too close because it's all locked off, but if you zoom in with your camera you can see there's plaques and things that tell you what's what, and it looked as though it was ceramic bowls and bottles, a couple of little things that they would have used in the hospital over 100 years ago. It's definitely worth coming down to the Justice Precinct to have a look. And you might learn something too. They've got big signs up to explain the story of the hospitals, who was involved, what different pieces of history. It's really fascinating. It's like being in a museum almost. Looking down at the different bricks and things that were used, it makes you wonder what life really was like when those bricks were being made. They say that some of the bricks came from Brickfield Hill, where they had the quarry and convicts made these bricks. One of the hospitals, I think it was the second hospital, didn't have limestone that was used in making of the bricks, and this caused decaying of the bricks really quickly. But then the third, which is the colonial, I believe, had limestone in the brick. So those bricks were probably more prominent in this site. The others must have broken down a little bit. But there's lots of information, and it's good for kids to come and see what the history was like. It's okay hearing about it in textbooks, but coming down to a site like this and actually seeing it for yourself and the atmosphere is really thrilling. It's a piece of our history that really shouldn't be ignored. And so much went into it, back-breaking labour, and the amount of poor convicts that perished probably in the making of any of the hospitals, and those who died on site. The number of people would be astronomical. But if you put yourself in the position of these poor people back in the day, you really get a sense of what life was like. And there was a drainage system as well. Their drainage and sewer system, they had to put up with quite a lot early on without any kind of real sewerage system. But eventually all of that came on board, and they've even got a section separate from the hospital that shows you the drainage and a large map area of where things were in relation to the Parramatta River. There's many accounts from different people, including David Johnson and several of the surgeons who were involved in the hospitals, on the terrible conditions that they had to live in. It is truly interesting to see the things that they've dug up. Marbles and bottles, different types of rock and stone and plates and things like that. It's really fascinating to see what they would have used. Little antique dolls and things like that made out of porcelain, all broken now, but maybe when the children's ward was created, this is what they were given at the hospital to kind of amuse themselves and take their mind off things that were going on. Various coins, lots of different things to come and see. It's definitely worth a look. The old hospital foundations at the Justice Precinct in Parramatta.
Aussie made.